So they got bored of waiting and decided to send special forces in a helicopter, as you do. And you might be able to see me running around in my flip-flops, because this happened at about 6 in the evening. Everyone was having dinner, totally caught by surprise. We were not prepared for this. No one expected this kind of response, this level of response. As you can see, there's a few people on the heli deck at that point with their hands up, trying to make it difficult for soldiers to get down. But as we'll see in a second, one of them's already abseiled on, and they're just trying to make it secure for their friends to join them. That's me running around, and I'm really gutted. People still think it's funny that I say this, but at the time, there were two things going through my head. The first one was, this is insane. They've sent a helicopter and men with guns. The other thing was, this is the coolest thing I've ever filmed. And I was stood underneath, filming up as the roast was going, thinking I was in Apocalypse Now. And in the back of my head, I was like, they're going to get the camera off me. I knew that much. I knew that Dennis and I were going to be one of the first people they wanted to arrest. And it was how much time I would have, how much filming could I do before they stopped us. And there's the first guy with his machine gun. I think at that point, I run away and lose a flip-flop. And Dennis, the photographer, I'm not sure you see it in this footage, got arrested immediately after these first few guys came on. And I ended up running around the ship trying to avoid them hiding. And the camera I was using, not a particularly good camera, but it had an internal memory card and an SD card. And I had the SD card filming, took it out, put it down my pants. And so I was really pleased with myself, but I did really well. And this is them trying to get onto the bridge. The normal procedure, as I found out, is for any soldiers who are boarding a ship, you want to take control of the ship if you need to. Go to the bridge, take control of the bridge and arrest the captain. That's a rainbow over the Christmas. So they went to the bridge, took control of the bridge and arrested Pete, the captain. Then they kicked down the door of the radio room where 3 people were trying to send pictures and information. It's where I'd also tried to get the SD card. I tried to put it through a porthole, but we couldn't get the porthole open. So again, preparations weren't great. Although in a way it was good, because had Phil and I both got our camera gear into the radio room, it would have been seized and nothing would have got out. So it was the fact we had to smuggle it in our pants, in our shoes, that we managed to get anything out at all. So once they'd taken control of the ship, we didn't really know what was going on. We didn't know what we'd been arrested for. We'd been told before we went out to the oil rig that the only way they could get the ship back on land was to charge us with terrorism or espionage. And we were pretty confident we hadn't done either of those. What we didn't account for was piracy. Again, slight oversight. And that was simply because Pirislamnia, the oil rig, is not a ship. It's a permanent structure, and you can only be accused of piracy if you take another vessel, and it wasn't a vessel, so it just hadn't been factored in. And the real thing that hadn't been factored in is that Russia doesn't necessarily care about rules. Again, quite crucial oversight. So we've been seized, we've got taken to Murmansk, which is very north, one of the most northerly ports. Very important in World War II, as I found out, where the Allies would send very precious supplies to Leningrad during the war and to the Russian forces. But it's a bit of a dying town, it's not a particularly pleasant place to be. I don't know what the temperature's like today, but a few days ago when I gave another talk it was -25. And it's dark for about 4 months of the year, there's very little sunlight. And that was where we were taken, without knowing exactly what was happening. We all kind of felt that the response of the Russians was pretty surprising, but that we were going to end up with a slap on the wrist and be sent back to Kirkenes, the port in Norway where we started. It was only, and it's embarrassing to say it, but it was only when I walked into the cell at the courtroom in Murmansk, waiting to go and have my hearing, that I heard someone say, it's 2 months, we've been given 2 months. I thought they were joking. I thought it was a really horrible joke to make for the people who were just arriving. We've been held in cells for 2 days in a military prison, which was pretty grim. In fact, probably worse than the detention centre we ended up in. And we assumed that was our punishment. We thought they'd keep us there for 2 days and then send us home. And to hear it that way was a complete shock. I didn't stop shaking for about a day. You know, I was in head, this is what I was thinking. This is a big story, they put 2 journalists in it. As it was, they deliberated for 20 minutes and then sent to school down for 2 months anyway. And arriving in Murmansk detention centre on the first night was one of the scariest and most surreal things I've ever done. And if it hadn't been for the fact that I was with the group, I'm not sure how I would have coped. Luckily we were shipped together in groups of 10, and it was seeing Cami, I'm not sure if you can see that. Oh yeah, right in the top, further along, the girl, she's 21, she'd never been to Europe before, she's from Argentina, and she was in my paddy wagon being taken to Murmansk detention centre, which broke down, by the way. The paddy wagon broke down, which was quite a nice metaphor for the Russian system. And Cami was saying to all of us, it's going to be okay, we've done the right thing, we're going to be okay, we haven't done anything wrong. And to have a 21-year-old girl who's never left home properly telling you that, it really humbled me and made me think, I do have to be strong here. This was not in the script, but the world will be watching, and that's all we could tell ourselves, that's all we could keep thinking. Going into my cell, meeting my cellmates for the first time was, again, terrifying. I'm not going to hide it. You hear a lot of stories about prison when you've never been to one, and they're not particularly good stories. And it was only when I got in that we started to realise the impact of the story and the protests that we've been involved in. Everyone in the prison knew we were coming, and all of our cellmates knew we were coming, and there was a competition between cellmates to behave the best to get a Greenpeace, as they said, as we found out. They wanted a Greenpeace in their cell because they knew that it would mean better treatment for them. Because we had an international profile, even at that stage, even that early on, the news stories were on Russian TV and they were on global TV. And that protected us to some extent. And people wanted us in their cells. And I remember walking into a foggy 40-a-day smoking room, and I don't smoke, so that was interesting. 2 bunk beds in either side of me. And one guy, quite a small pug-faced guy, called Jenna, sat on top of one. And a very broad-shouldered, muscular guy called Sasha turned and looked at me with a cigarette in his mouth, thinking, oh God, this is it. This is where I learned how to fight very quickly or suffer. And he just smiled, a massive grin, and said, Greenpeace! I have Greenpeace! And detention centre in Murmansk is quite a bipolar existence for them anyway. They sleep all day, and then all night they have a messaging system called Doroga, the road, which I won't go into now. It's one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, but I just don't have time to go into it. Buy me a pint later, maybe I'll tell you. But they spent all night messaging their friends in other cells and just gloating about the fact that they had a Greenpeace. And I was really well treated. I found out much later, and it would have been nice to have known in the first week when I was very uncertain about what was going to happen in Murmansk, that there are 2 rules in prison. The first rule is share everything, and the second rule was no violence. So during the time I was there, I think in the whole prison, and even one's enough, but there was only 1 stabbing, there was only 1 case of someone being injured by another inmate. Most of the beatings, unfortunately, are dished out by the authorities. Never to Greenpeace, we were always protected from that kind of treatment. And our cellmates were very conscientious about us, and I'm very thankful to them. I've stayed in touch through letters with a couple of my cellmates. The big problem, obviously, is communication. There's absolutely no way to communicate. And I was, after 3 weeks, given my little Russian phrase book, so I could tell them things like, fill it up please, and is there a petrol station nearby? But it had the basics in it, which in the first weeks, I don't speak Russian, I don't know if anyone here speaks Russian, but it is totally alien, it's Cyrillic alphabet, so nothing makes sense. There was absolutely no crossover that I could see, and there was a lot of Pictionary going on in the first week as I tried to explain who I was, what I was doing, why I was in prison, could I have some bread please, that kind of thing. But conditions were really hard. 23 hours a day in our cells, and the cells were probably from, well, not even as long as this bench, and probably not a lot wider. There was a incredibly unhygienic toilet. Luckily mine had a toilet seat, not everyone's had. There were rats everywhere. I didn't encounter them, but there were leeches apparently in a lot of the bathrooms. Conditions were cold as well, because Murmansk obviously is a very cold place, and at night, because they're communicating with one another, the windows are left open in most cells, so temperatures would drop to -3 or 4 in the cell, and it was constant cups of tea through the night for my cellmates to keep me warm, and eventually complaining enough about the conditions to get extra blankets. Food was the single worst thing I've ever eaten. It's designed to keep you alive, barely. I was explaining to Marie and Peter earlier that I lost over a stone, as did most of the group. It was just barely edible, but you knew you had to eat something. But there was certainly no nutrition, and if it hadn't been for Greenpeace and their volunteers, life would have been much, much tougher in Murmansk. They would queue from about 5 in the morning until 5 at night when opening hours and visiting hours were allowed, just bringing parcels